She helped a homeless man fix his phone. Next day, he bought the company she worked for. The rain slammed against the glass of the suburban coffee shop. It was a bleak Monday morning. Mia stood near the entrance, shaking the cold water from her umbrella. At 28, she was a data analyst who knew exactly what it felt like to be pushed to the edge. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, another notification from the hospital billing department. Her mother's surgery was weeks away, and the numbers on the screen were a constant, suffocating reminder of what she couldn't afford. She walked toward the counter, hoping the caffeine would numb the exhaustion. That's when she heard it. Frantic, desperate knocking coming from a dark, hidden corner. In that shadows sat an elderly man hunched over a small table. This was Elias. He didn't look like a titan of industry. He looked like a man who had been defeated by the world. His hands trembled so violently he could barely hold the frayed charging cable he was trying to force into his phone. As he struggled, a memory flashed in Elias's mind like a recurring nightmare. The cold mahogany table, the sharp strike of the gavel, and the security guards escorting him to the curb of his own building. "You're out, Elias," they had told him. He was the founder, now a fugitive in his own empire, left with nothing but the soaked clothes on his back and a single battered smartphone. To the world, that phone was junk. To Elias, it held the only digital access key that could prove the board's fraud and reclaim his life's work. If that phone didn't power up by noon, the takeover would be permanent. The charging port was packed with hardened mud from his nights sleeping on the street. He pushed the cable harder, his movements erratic with panic. "It is broken, old man," a young barista muttered, passing by with a tray. "You cannot stay here if you do not buy anything." Elias looked up, his eyes wide and hollowed by despair. Mia stopped in her tracks. She didn't see a stranger. She saw her late father, the way he used to look when the modern world moved too fast and left him behind. Mia walked over, gently placing her hot coffee on his table. She pulled out the chair across from him. "Excuse me," Mia said softly. "May I take a look at that?" Elias pulled the phone to his chest defensively, his knuckles white. "It has to turn on. I have to make a connection. They are taking everything." "I understand," Mia replied, her voice a steady anchor. She unzipped her bag and pulled out a small, specialized kit she used for field testing hardware. "I work with data systems. I fix things like this all the time." She offered a small, reassuring smile. Slowly, Elias slid the device across the table. Mia held a small flashlight between her teeth. With a tiny anti-static brush and precision tweezers, she began to delicately extract the grit from the port. "Technology moves so fast," Elias murmured, his eyes fixed on her hands. "It does not wait for old men." Mia used a microscopic swab to clean the metal contacts. She clicked his cable into the port with a firm, satisfying snap. A second later, the screen flickered, displaying a bright battery icon. Elias gasped, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his face. Mia handed the phone back, her voice quiet but firm. "Do not worry, sir. I know technology can feel cold and intimidating, but usually it just takes a little patience to reconnect." The atmosphere inside the Apex corporate tower was suffocating. Every cubicle felt like a glass cage. Mia stepped off the elevator, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was exhausted, but she held her head high, clutching the flash drive that contained her 3-night-long labor of love, the Horizon Restructuring Project. As she passed Sarah's office, Mia stopped. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, she caught a glimpse of Sarah, usually so poised, hunched over her desk, staring with hollow, desperate eyes at a framed photograph of her 2 young children. For a split second, the venom was gone, replaced by a look of sheer, quiet terror. Then, Sarah's phone buzzed. "I told you, I'll figure it out." Sarah hissed into the receiver, her voice trembling with a frantic edge. "Just give me more time. Please, don't talk about the mortgage in front of my kids." She slammed the phone down and caught Mia's reflection in the glass. In an instant, the mask of the cold, ruthless executive snapped back into place. Mia, my office. Now. Sarah stood in her doorway, her $1,000 suit, a shield that couldn't hide the frantic energy vibrating beneath her skin. She didn't just manage people. She broke them to feel like she still held some thread of control over her own crumbling life. As soon as the door closed, Sarah snatched the flash drive from Mia's hand. She plugged it into her laptop and began scrolling through Mia's innovative data models. "This is adequate," Sarah said, her voice dripping with artificial boredom. "But the formatting is a mess. I'll have to rewrite the entire strategy tonight before the board meeting tomorrow." Mia blinked, stunned. "Rewrite it?" "Sarah, those projections took 70 hours to calculate. They are perfect. They can save our entire division from the layoffs." Sarah stood up, leaning her palms on the mahogany desk. She towered over Mia. "Let's be very clear about how this works, Mia. You are a junior analyst. You are a ghost. Ghosts don't present to billionaires. I do." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I've already stripped your name from the metadata. Tomorrow the new owners will hear this proposal from my lips. It will be my vision that saves the company." "You're stealing it," Mia whispered, her voice trembling. "That is my work. You know I need the credit for the promotion. I need it for my mother's surgery." Sarah let out a short, cruel laugh, but there was a jagged, desperate note in it. She walked around the desk, stopping just inches from Mia. She reached out and adjusted Mia's collar with a patronizing pat. "Your mother? How touching," Sarah said, her face hardening into a mask of pure survival. "But here's the reality. I have a mortgage on a 5-bedroom house and a reputation to maintain. In this world, Mia, only those willing to do what is necessary survive. You're lucky I even let you keep your desk." She leaned in closer. "If you say one word to the board, I will not only fire you, but I will make sure you never work in this city again. Who do you think they'll believe? The loyal executive, or the struggling girl who can't even afford a decent car?" Mia felt a hot tear sting her eye, but she forced herself to swallow the sob. She thought of her mother's hospital bill. She thought of Sarah's desperate phone call. It was a cycle of fear, and she was trapped in the gears. "Get out," Sarah commanded, turning back to her monitor. "And don't forget to finish the filing for my other projects by 6 p.m. Mia walked out, her face burning with humiliation. Every colleague was watching, their heads ducked in fear of becoming the next target. Mia sat at her desk, her hands shaking. She was being robbed in broad daylight, silenced by a woman who saw her only as a tool for her own preservation. But as she looked at her desk, she remembered the old man's words, "Patience to reconnect." For now, she would stay silent, not because she was weak, but because she was a survivor. The only light in Mia's tiny apartment came from the flickering neon sign across the street. She sat on the floor, leaning against her worn-out sofa. Her eyes were red, and her laptop sat abandoned on the coffee table. Beside it lay a stack of medical bills and a half-written resignation letter. The silence was heavy, filled with the crushing weight of Sarah's threats. Mia felt small. She felt invisible. Suddenly, her phone vibrated. An unknown number. She hesitated, then swiped to answer. "Hello?" she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Mia, is that you, child?" It was a man's voice. It was raspy, old, but carried a strange, melodic warmth. It was Elias. "Mr. Elias?" Mia sat up, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. How? How did you get my number?" "You called your own phone from mine this morning to test the connection, remember?" Elias chuckled softly. "I hope I am not disturbing you. I had to call." "Is the phone working okay?" Mia asked, her professional instincts kicking in despite her grief. "The phone is perfect," Elias replied. But then his voice softened, turning solemn. "But that is not why I called. I called because today I was a ghost. I walked past hundreds of people, and they looked through me as if I were made of glass, except for you." Mia bit her lip, trying to stay composed. You didn't just fix a machine, Mia, Elias continued. You looked at an old man in a dirty coat, and you saw a human being. You gave me back my dignity when I was at my lowest. I wanted you to know that your kindness saved more than just a piece of plastic today. That was the breaking point. A sob escaped Mia's throat. Once it started, she couldn't stop. Mia? What is it? What happened? The concern in his voice was genuine, like a grandfather sensing a wound. I'm sorry, Mr. Elias, she sobbed, burying her face in her knees. It's so hard. I tried to do the right thing. I worked so hard on a project to save my team, to help my mother, but my boss stole it. She told me that being good makes me weak. She told me that in this world, honesty has no value. She wasn't complaining about the money or the promotion. She was mourning the loss of her belief in goodness. She told me that people like me are just tools to be used, Mia whispered into the receiver. Is she right, Mr. Elias? Is the world really that cold? There was a long silence on the other end. For a moment, Mia thought the connection had dropped. Then, Elias spoke, his voice now steel-plated and firm. Listen to me, Mia. People like her think they are winning because they play by the rules of shadows. But shadows cannot exist without light. Your honesty is not a weakness. It is your greatest power. The world isn't cold, Mia. It is just waiting for people like you to set it on fire. I don't feel powerful, Mia admitted, looking at her resignation letter. I feel defeated. Sleep now, child, Elias said softly, his voice returning to a gentle hum. Do not write that letter yet. Tomorrow is a new day, and the truth has a funny way of finding the light. Just remember to wear your best smile tomorrow. You've earned it. When she hung up, the room didn't feel quite so dark. She didn't know who Elias really was, but for the first time in years, Mia didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. The grand lobby of Apex headquarters was a sea of nervous energy. Security guards in crisp uniforms stood at every entrance, and the polished marble floor shone like glass. Word had spread like wildfire. The elusive chairman, who had been missing during a brutal internal coup, was returning today after successfully reclaiming his majority stake. Staff members were lined up in a rigid formation, their breaths held in anticipation. Sarah stood at the very front, her posture perfect and her expression practiced. She looked like the image of a loyal executive, clutching the folder containing Mia's stolen work as if it were her own shield. Mia stood in the far back, tucked behind a decorative pillar. Her eyes were heavy from a sleepless night, and she felt like a ghost in her own life. She had no intention of being noticed. She only wanted to survive the day without losing her insurance. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors swung open. There was no flashy motorcade or roaring Rolls-Royce. Instead, a man walked in quietly, his footsteps firm and measured. He wore a classic, charcoal gray wool suit, tailored to perfection, yet echoing a bygone era of elegance and integrity. It was Elias. His face was clean-shaven now, his silver hair neatly combed back. The exhaustion of the homeless man from the cafe was replaced by an aura of quiet, unshakable authority, the look of a man who built empires with his bare hands. Sarah's face lit up with a predatory grin. As Elias approached the line of executives, she stepped forward, blocking his path with an eager outstretched hand. "Welcome back, Mr. Chairman," Sarah chirped, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I am Sarah, head of strategy. We have been so worried. I actually have a revolutionary restructuring plan ready for your immediate review." Elias didn't even look at her. He didn't look at the folder. He didn't look at any of the directors bowing their heads. He walked right past Sarah, his eyes scanning the back of the room with an intensity that made the crowd part like the Red Sea. The room went deathly silent. Sarah's hand hung in the air, her face turning a deep shade of crimson as Elias marched straight toward the shadows behind the pillar. Mia froze as the chairman stopped just inches away from her. Elias reached up and slowly removed his glasses, his eyes soft but filled with a profound recognition. Then, in front of the entire company, The most powerful man in the building did something no one expected. He bowed. It wasn't a shallow nod. It was a deep, respectful bow of one soul acknowledging another. "Good morning, Mia," Elias said, his voice carrying through the silent lobby like a bell. "I told you that the truth has a way of finding the light. It is time for us to get to work." Mia's heart stopped. She looked up at him, and for the first time in her career, she felt the weight of her own worth. Behind her, Sarah's folder hit the marble floor with a dull, hollow thud. The air in the executive boardroom was freezing. Sunlight cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing over the massive mahogany table. Sarah stood at the head of the room, her hands shaking as she adjusted the projector. "As you can see from my Horizon strategy," Sarah began, her voice tight and unnaturally high, "the data projections for the third quarter show a direct correlation between, staff optimization and—" She paused, squinting at a complex chart on the screen. It was Mia's work, a nuanced algorithm designed to balance profit with employee retention. "And the human capital overhead?" one board member prompted, leaning forward. Sarah stammered, "Yes, exactly. The overhead will be minimized through aggressive streamlining." Elias sat at the far end of the table, his fingers steepled. He watched Sarah with an expression of quiet, terrifying calm. "Streamlining, Sarah?" Elias's voice was like velvet over gravel. "That is interesting. Because the notes on page 14 suggest a graceful transition model that protects veteran staff. Can you explain the ethical logic behind your own formula?" Sarah's face went pale. Beads of sweat broke out on her forehead. I felt that a hybrid approach was best. The math is quite complex, Mr. Chairman." "The math is indeed complex," Elias said, standing up slowly. "But the soul behind the math is quite simple." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old, scratched smartphone Mia had fixed. He placed it in the center of the table with a sharp clack. "This device was dead yesterday," Elias said, his eyes locking onto Sarah's. "The port was jammed with the grime of the streets. Most people saw a piece of junk, but one person saw a connection that needed to be restored." He turned toward the door. "Mia, please, come in." Mia stepped into the room. She was no longer hiding behind pillars. She stood straight, her eyes meeting the board members' gazes. "Sarah," Elias continued, his voice dropping an octave, "you talk about aggressive streamlining. Yet you couldn't explain the very human-centric safeguards written into this proposal. Do you know why?" Sarah opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "Because a project with this much heart," Elias said, gesturing to the screen, "could only be written by someone who knows how to patiently clean away the dust to help a stranger in the rain." He looked at the board members. "It could not be written by someone who is willing to trample over their own colleagues just to survive a storm." Elias slid his glasses back on. "Mia, the floor is yours. Explain to this board what it actually means to lead with integrity." Mia stepped toward the screen. As she began to speak, her voice was clear, confident, and filled with the authority of the person who had actually lived every line of the data. Behind her, Sarah collapsed into her chair, her stolen mask finally shattered. The silence in the boardroom was absolute, broken only by the sharp, jagged sound of Sarah's breathing. She sat crumpled in the expensive leather chair, her face buried in her hands. The facade of the powerful executive had vanished, leaving behind a woman stripped of her pride. "I had no choice," Sarah suddenly sobbed, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "The bank, they are taking the house. I have 2 children, Mr. Chairman." I was terrified. I thought if I didn't have this win, we would be on the street. The board members looked away, uncomfortable with the raw display of desperation. Mia stood still, her anger softening into a complex knot of pity. She knew that feeling, the suffocating weight of a ticking clock and a mounting bill. Elias didn't move to the phone to call security. He didn't shout for a public escort from the building. He simply walked to the window, looking out at the city he had built. "Desperation is a powerful ghost, Sarah," Elias said, his back turned. It makes us believe that the only way to save ourselves is to drown someone else. He turned back to face her, his expression unreadable but firm. I will not fire you today, Elias stated calmly. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Sarah looked up, her eyes wide and wet with disbelief. However, Elias continued, his voice hardening like iron, leadership is a privilege reserved for those with the character to protect their people, not exploit them. As of this moment, you are stripped of your title as head of strategy. He walked toward her, leaning over the table. You will return to a junior analyst position. You will work under the same conditions you forced upon others. Your salary will be reduced to the standard rate, but it will be enough to keep your children in their home. Sarah nodded frantically, tears of relief and shame streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you, sir. Do not thank me yet, Elias replied, his gaze shifting to Mia. You have a long road of restitution ahead of you. You will spend your days supporting the very project you tried to steal. He straightened his coat, his voice resonating with a moral finality that moved even the most hardened directors in the room. I can empathize with your desperation, Sarah, Elias said, his voice carrying the weight of a lifetime of hard decisions. But using your own hardship as a weapon to strip away the work of a decent person is something I will never tolerate under this roof. He gestured for the board to rise. We are a company of builders, not scavengers. Let us remember that as we move forward. The storm that had battered the city all morning finally broke, leaving the skyline washed in a brilliant, golden hue. Inside the chairman's office, the atmosphere was a world away from the cold, clinical tension of the boardroom. Sunlight flooded through the floor-to-ceiling windows, warming the dark mahogany furniture and the scent of old books. Elias sat behind his desk, but he didn't look like a titan of industry or a distant billionaire. He had removed his suit jacket, and in the soft light, he looked like a grandfather offering a seat to a guest he truly respected. Sit down, Mia, Elias said softly, gesturing to the velvet chair across from him. Please, let's speak away from the eyes of the board. Mia sat, her hands resting calmly in her lap. The adrenaline of the confrontation had faded, replaced by a quiet, steady peace. She wasn't shaking anymore. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a weight crushing her chest. I watched you closely today, Mia, Elias began, his eyes reflecting the amber light of the sunset. When Sarah fell, when she was exposed in front of everyone, you didn't gloat. You didn't smile at her misfortune. You simply stood by your work. Why? Mia looked out at the city for a moment. I know what it's like to be afraid, sir. I know what it feels like to have your back against a wall, wondering how you'll pay for the next meal or the next medical bill. Fear makes people do terrible things. Anger wouldn't have fixed her mistakes, and it certainly wouldn't pay for my mother's treatment. Elias nodded, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. He pulled a single heavy sheet of paper from a leather folder and laid it on the desk. I have spent 40 years building Apex, Elias said, his voice echoing with the wisdom of a long journey. I have seen thousands of analysts, hundreds of managers, and dozens of people who thought they were geniuses. Most of them were just sharks in expensive suits. They thought leadership was about power. They were wrong. He leaned forward, his gaze locking onto hers. I am not going to make you the CEO today, Mia. That would be a fairy tale. And this is a business. You are brilliant, but you are still young. This company is a beast that requires years of experience to tame without being swallowed whole. Mia felt a wave of relief. She didn't want a crown she wasn't ready for. She wanted a foundation she had earned. I understand, sir, truly. However, Elias continued, his voice growing firm and resonant, I am appointing you as the new head of strategic development. This is not a junior role. You will directly manage the implementation of your Horizon project. You will have your own budget, your own hand-picked team, and the full authority to prove that your vision of a human-centric corporation can actually work. He slid the document toward her. The compensation package is substantial. It includes the highest-tier executive health insurance. It will cover your mother's specialists, her surgery, and the full cost of her recovery at the best private facility in the state. No more bills, Mia. No more debt. Mia looked at the numbers on the page, her vision blurring as tears finally threatened to spill over. It wasn't just a paycheck. It was the safety she had fought so hard to provide for her family. "Why me, Mr. Elias?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "There are people with more degrees, more years in the field." Elias stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the empire he had built. "Because I am not giving you a company, Mia. I am simply giving you back the opportunity to serve it through your own talent. I am restoring a connection that was almost broken." He turned back to her, his expression solemn. "The world is full of people who think talent is a weapon to be used to climb over others. But I believe talent is a tool meant to build bridges. We need people who are sharp enough to understand the cold data, but kind enough to remember the warm hearts of the people behind the numbers." He walked over and rested a fatherly hand on her shoulder. "Go to the hospital, Mia. Tell your mother she can rest now. Tell her that her daughter's kindness saved more than just an old man's phone. Then, come back on Monday. We have a lot of work to do." The morning sun cast a warm, steady glow over the revamped open-plan office of Apex. The cold, suffocating silence of the past had been replaced by a rhythmic hum of collaboration and genuine laughter. Gone were the glass walls of fear. In their place was an atmosphere that felt alive, breathing with a new sense of purpose. Mia stood by the large window of her new office, holding a steaming cup of coffee. She wasn't just watching the skyline, she was watching her team. She looked different now. Her shoulders were square, her gaze was clear, and the shadows of exhaustion that once haunted her eyes had vanished. Down on the main floor, something caught her eye. She paused, a soft smile spreading across her face. A young, tech-savvy intern was sitting beside an older employee who had been with the firm for 30 years. Instead of the usual eye-rolling or impatient sighing, the young man was leaning in close. He was patiently guiding the older man's hand as they navigated the complex new Horizon interface Mia had designed. "Take your time, Arthur," the young man whispered, his voice carrying a warmth that reached Mia's balcony. "It's just a new way to connect. We'll get it together." Mia felt a lump in her throat. It was a mirror image of that rainy morning in the cafe. She realized then that her project wasn't just about data or efficiency. It was about ensuring that in the race toward the future, no one was left behind. The door behind her opened quietly. Elias stepped in, no longer the Teotui man from the cafe, but a mentor, watching his vision come to life. He stood beside her, looking out at the office floor. "You did it, Mia," Elias said softly, his voice full of pride. "You didn't just change the workflow. You changed the heart of this building." Mia turned to him, her eyes bright. "I just remembered what you told me, sir. That technology doesn't wait for people, but people can choose to wait for each other." Elias nodded, looking down at the old smartphone still tucked in his pocket, a permanent reminder of a connection saved. "A company is just a collection of stories, Mia. I'm glad we decided to write a better one." As Mia turned back to her desk to continue her work, the final realization settled over her. True power isn't found in the ability to climb over others, but in the strength to reach back and pull them up with you. In the world of business, they say kindness is a luxury, but at Apex it had become the foundation. Because real success isn't measured by how fast you move alone, but by how many people you bring across the finish line. Respect and sincere kindness will always have the power to transform even the coldest systems into a home. The story of Mia and Elias is a quiet reminder that in a world obsessed with speed and power, the most enduring strength is often the most silent. We spend our lives building walls and high-speed connections, yet we forget that the soul only reconnects through patience. As we leave Mia in her sunlit office, let her journey stay with you, not as a lesson to be memorized, but as a question to be asked. Who are we when the world isn't looking? Do we choose to be the one who tramples, or the one who cleans the dust to help a stranger see the light? True leadership isn't a title on a mahogany desk. It's the bridge you build for someone else to cross. Because in the end, kindness isn't an investment we make to get rich, it's the only thing that keeps the world from turning cold. If Mia's courage touched you today, please share that light by liking and sharing this video. It helps these stories find the people who need them most. To walk with us through more human journeys, hit subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories and turn on the bell. Thank you for being part of our community. Until next time, remember, you always have the power to make the world a little warmer, one small connection at a time.